All right, this section is going to be a little bit of a bonus module for the parents out there, or just really a video to help you navigate some of the things that might come up when you tell your family you want to join the military. The first thing I will say is that all types of emotions are completely normal to experience, whether you're a parent and your kid says they want to do ROTC or you're trying to talk your family into supporting you during this very big decision in your life. There's all kinds of emotions like fear, uncertainty. Is my kid enough? Is he going to get the scholarship? Is he competitive for it? What's going to happen to him after he's done with college? What will his life be like in college? So many of those questions we will go over in this section, as well as the reassurance that you need to hear just from somebody who has gone through it and in the conversations I've even had with my parents over the years throughout this process. My parents, when I first told them what I wanted to do, were worried about the possibility that I would deploy and go to combat and get shot at and have to do some really intense things in the field environment. Or that I would pick a job that was super stressful and that I would be forever changed into the super robot soldier that wouldn't be a reflection of the kid that they used to know. And I'm still, if I were to say anything to that right now, I'm a better version of myself than I was before, but I'm still me. And honestly, what I would say two things. If I have been taught a recurring theme in the military from leadership classes and, just experiencing the fleet firsthand, it's that people become more of who they already are, whether you're in war or you're stressed out at the job in a normal work environment. There's a general consensus among everybody who has written books from all the way back to World War II to present days that it doesn't change a person. It makes them more of who they already are, the good and the bad, which is why becoming the best version of yourself, i.e. training in the military and reading books, reflecting on your leadership and developing the parts of yourself that you call weaknesses is so important, and to study about these situations that people might have to face in war. But just know that I can honestly say that from my experience and even working with other joint forces in different countries, we have some of the most effective training pipelines for training officers and preparing them for the hardships that they might have to face in a real life situation. To that same point, the second thing that I will say is that really only 10% of the jobs in the US military are combat arms related, i.e. they are involved in combat and combat operations, right? The other 90% of the jobs in the military are for combat support, which usually means that you're not going to be in a contested environment or a hostile environment where the enemy is shooting at you and you are on the front lines. I have friends that are in the infantry and they're in special ops and they still have not seen any combat experience, fortunately. That doesn't mean that it can't change, but just know that there is a huge community of combat support roles across every single branch of the military that doesn't involve you having to pull a trigger and look down the scope and look at the enemy like you see in the movies. That is an element of it, and everybody should be prepared for that type of reality. But for the most part, almost a very few percentage are actually going to experience that reality. Going back to telling your family that this is the type of life that you want to take and that this is the commitment you want to make to your country and the pipeline you want to go through. The best thing that my parents did for me when I told them about my interest in doing this when I was a sophomore in high school was that they supported me. They didn't have all the answers. They didn't understand what this whole process would entail, but they loved me and they supported my decision to at least start exploring those options. Even though at the time for them it was very scary, and they knew that I didn't have all the answers as well. So we were kind of all in this together to figure out what this process was going to entail. I had grandparents that had mixed emotions about this. I had friends, I had my parents' friends that were trying to talk me out of it. And I just got a wide spread of support or lack thereof when I started talking about this interest. When I was applying for the candidate selection pool, like to get the scholarship, I need to mention that it was extremely competitive amongst the people that I was competing against, right? There were guys that had been training for the fitness test long before I had even shown up to that very first day of the fitness test. There were people that had done junior ROTC, which is what you can do in high school to make yourself more competitive. There were even guys in my candidate pool that selected and signed their enlistment paperwork saying that they were going to enlist if they didn't get the scholarship, and that just showcased even more commitment on their end. I walked in with absolutely none of that. I hadn't signed any paperwork. I had expressed interest verbally, and I was willing to come to the first fitness test that was run about 45 minutes away from where I lived. For more insight on these things, I have a course coming out. It's a fully comprehensive course on ROTC and everything you would need. And it's basically a documentation of all the mistakes I made and the things that I wish I knew at the moment that I needed to know them. And it's coming out this summer. For my parents, my officer recruiter actually wasn't that forthcoming with all the information that she was giving me. And that was a good thing. She wanted me to understand the details of what I was signing up for more so than my parents. Initially, that rubbed my parents the wrong way because they felt like she was keeping, information, or that she wasn't as being communicative as she should have been. But I was getting all the information that I needed. And what really mitigated that point of friction for me and my family was that we just had open and honest communication about what we were receiving from, the recruiters and from the interview process that I was going through. It's essential to have that communication with how the process is going. And a mature officer recruiter will actually be more involved with the kid, or, with your kid that is applying for the program, more so than you, because they want that to be their decision, than more so than the parents having an influence on that. I'm sorry for stating the obvious, but essentially enlisted and officers are different, right? You can enlist in the military and you will be given a rank of E1 all the way up to E8, E9, right? Officers, completely separate rank structure, and all officers outrank the enlisted. When you are joining the military and doing ROTC, you are going in as an officer. You are not enlisting. Officers lead the enlisted in every capacity of the military. Now, in this next section, let's talk about some of the nuances and the fine print of the application process that might not be that apparent for you until later on in the application. And this would be really good to know before you actually start the entire process. ROTC stands for Reserve Officer Training Commission. All right, that means you are technically in the reserves while you are going to college, but your obligation to service after you graduate college is 4 to 5 years of active duty in the operational forces. This means that you will be working in the military full time. You could be stationed overseas in like London, Germany, and a ton of other different locations. But yes, you can bring family to those locations as well. That is not a deployment. That is just a duty station or a big military base that everybody stays at, right? There's families that travel with their spouse in the military to Japan, to, like I said, Germany, London. There are so many bases, Guam, right? That is not a deployment. So you will spend roughly a few years at that duty station, and then from there, you will be doing full-time active duty work. Here's another part of the fine print. You can actually drop your ROTC scholarship if you are selected for it. You can drop it at any time in the first year, i.e. your freshman year of college, without having to pay them back. When you owe a commitment to pay the government back for your ROTC scholarship is when you show up to class on the first day of your sophomore year of college. This is because they actually want to give people a year to experience ROTC lifestyle and to find out if this commitment is going to be worth it for them in the long run. Because after you commit to it in that sophomore year, it can feel scary, but that is actually the day that they say, hey, you need to commit to this, and you sign the paper saying you will go through with the program or you will pay them back. After you do your 4 to 5 years, you can choose to stay in and do more active duty time, or you can get out and go into the reserves for another 4 years. Everybody has to do 4 years in the reserves after their active duty commitment. And there's a different variety. There's a different variety of what you can choose. So you can go into the active ready reserve. You can go to the individual ready reserve, where you don't report to anyone, but they do have you on recall if there is a World War III end of the world style situation or like an outbreak. That last point about how they can call you back if you're in the individual ready reserve might sound kind of scary, but just know that the last time that they did that was during the Korean War, where South Korea was almost completely overtaken by the Chinese and the North Koreans. It would take something of a global war scale or a significant contingency event for them to pull the individual ready reserve back within those 4 years that you're serving after you've already done your initial commitment. Now, let's talk about what your son or daughter's experience will be during this ROTC, training phase while they're in college doing their 4 years studying for their degree while participating in this program. Your kid will have a relatively normal college experience. They can do extracurricular sports, they can do clubs, they can do all kinds of things. They can even work a job if they need to. They'll be attending classes on campus just like everybody else. They will have 1 or 2 days out of the week in the early morning or the late afternoon that is deconflicted with their normal schedule to train military skills like lab days. I have a YouTube video that explains what these lab days are like, but this is actually the fun part of being in the program. It's essentially tactical and leadership training. You as a parent will have direct access to the ROTC instructor staff that are running the unit that are on campus. They're there to answer all of your questions and all of your concerns that you might have throughout the 4 years of this process. The first day of school, our unit actually held like a 2-hour long parent Q&A with all the instructor staff. We were not in the room. It was just the parents being able to ask all the hard questions to these guys about what this whole process was going to be like. Remember, it is their job to make sure that your kid or your son or daughter graduates this program. If someone's dropping out or they're not passing some of the standards that are there, they view that as a failure on their part because their job is to produce officers in the US military. For my parents, this Q&A was actually a very camaraderie experience because they got to be around a lot of other parents that they'd never met before that were experiencing some of the same emotions of uncertainty, that was coming up as this whole thing was starting and I was, beginning college. By the time your son or daughter is a sophomore in college, they're going to be pretty independent and you're not going to be as closely following up with how their experience is going because they're going to be pretty much full-blown adults at that point. I still needed some financial support from my parents, during my sophomore and junior year, because I was still a broke college kid like everybody else is usually. But part of the ROTC scholarship, you are provided stipends. So you get like a book stipend. It's like a couple $100s a semester, and you're actually paid a couple $100 every couple weeks throughout the entirety of the program, which is also really helpful to alleviate some of that financial stress. If your kid does not get selected for the ROTC scholarship in any of the branches, they can apply for it in college as well. So I applied for the process in high school, and I was actually fortunate to get selected on the late board in the spring semester of my senior year of high school. There were guys that were in the program that applied for ROTC, participated in ROTC, and did everything in their freshman year of college to be competitive for the sophomore, junior, senior scholarship that they would pay for if they were competitive for it. There were guys that even applied sophomore year, junior year, and even senior year of their college experience to get selected for that last semester of them paying for it. So the longer you stay with the process, the more competitive you get because a lot of people will drop out of the competitive pool for that year. The only downside to that is obviously you would have to pay for that freshman year or however many semesters you don't currently have before you're selected for the scholarship. And no, they do not pay you back they don't back pay a semester if you get selected. They only pay for the future semesters to come. The last thing I'll say is that the process and training to become a US military officer, it's very hard and challenging and rewarding, but it's not impossible. And it might feel that way when you are culture shocked into the amount of nuances and the standards and all the things that you have to learn once this program really takes off in college. My unit actually put my class through a 3-day mock boot camp environment at the Naval Science Building on campus. And when my parents picked me up from that 3-day just like chaotic boot camp environment, I was actually shell-shocked. My voice was totally on. I had cuts and scrapes on my hands from doing bear crawls and push-ups on the floor of the gym. And I just did not know if I was going to make it through this because of how much they had deconstructed us into identifying all the things that, we were weak on and needed to improve on. And the best thing they did for me in that moment when I was telling them, like, I don't know if I can make it through this process, the best thing that they did was they told me not to quit because that's what I wanted them to say. I wanted them to say, no, I see how you look now. I think we should drop this before it becomes a lot more hard and strenuous and this whole thing's about to take off. The best thing they did was take the advice of honestly the instructor staff, and they were just going to trust the process and trust that they knew how to build us up into who we are and who we needed to be to meet the standards that are experienced by officers in the military. And to that point, from my perspective, looking back on that day when I was just sitting in Panera with my parents, it has to have been like 6 years ago at this point. You cannot underestimate how strong you will become through this process. You cannot underestimate how much you will grow as a person, personally, professionally, spiritually, physically, to meet these standards. There are so many people that have gone through this process before and they have been successful. And there's no reason that you can't do that either, even though it feels like you're gonna climb a mountain to reach the standards that they have set for you. But that's how you know you're in the presence of a good unit, and that is how you're going to really be fulfilled when you look back and you see how far you've come throughout this process. I hope this video helped. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions and I'll do my best to respond. Thank you for watching. Let's get tuned in for the next module.